Welcome, everyone, back to another episode of Leadership from the Heart. I'm your host, Romie, and this week we're going to be expanding on what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. And so, just to recap, we've been talking about assumptions and baggage and the stories that we carry into the workplace. And after reading some of the DMs and the comments and hearing from so many of you guys, I noticed something interesting. Very few people asked, how do I become a better leader? Instead, they keep asking questions like, why am I people pleasing and why do I need approval? And some people were saying that this is helpful because they do avoid difficult difficult conversations. And I think that those are better questions to be asking because maybe it's not a leadership problem. It's not a skill issue, right? And when we talked about this last week, it's more so that we keep protecting ourselves and we do it subconsciously. And that's why, I don't want to talk about techniques for the next couple weeks because I think we've talked about techniques and I've talked about techniques for so long. And what I'm noticing is that people don't necessarily move once they know more. They move once they unpack their bags and they unlearn the things that they learned from probably early childhood. And most of the things that we do are either running towards pleasure or running from pain. And usually fear is quietly running our lives. And I don't want that to continue because I think that that's what's created leadership into what it is right now. And we're seeing a shift, and I'm going to keep calling that shift out because I believe it to be true, where we're seeing people become a lot more compassionate and a lot more open to listening to the reasons why. And, in my latest series, we talk a little bit about the why behind the why of things, of perfectionism, of kindness, of high standards and stuff like that. And until we recognize what's underneath these behaviors, we'll keep trying to fix when we're not actually getting to the root of the problem. And so from a behavior to protection, one of the biggest shifts in my own leadership is I stopped asking, why am I doing this? And I started asking, what's making me do this? Because all of us want to be better, right? And we just don't understand why the want is not enough. And I think that it's subconscious, like I said, and it's also, neural pathways that we've created that are really hard to break because we're not quite understanding what exactly is happening. And that's why my new favorite thing is pattern recognition. We think that if we can just will our way, and sometimes you can will your way into doing something, but most of the easier way, I think, is to kind of uncover the reasons why we continue this behavior. Because it's not random. Most people are intelligent, but at some point you have to ask yourself, why do you keep trying to keep yourself safe? And it's probably because those things absolutely helped you succeed. It protected you from things like embarrassment and rejection and criticism, sometimes even disappointment. And I know none of us like to fail, right? But failure is, not unfortunately, but failure is part of success. It's part of the equation. The challenge is that, like we talked about last week, what protected you once won't continue protecting you if it's no longer serving you. It starts to limit you, and your leadership, it doesn't just expose your strengths, it also exposes your quote unquote weaknesses. And pressure has a way of revealing the things that are living underneath. And, that's why two leaders can attend the same training, read the same books, know the same leadership principles, but have two completely different outcomes when pressure arrives. It's because knowledge is not the differentiator, right? Awareness of yourself and your patterns are, right? Fear is, like I said, running the show pretty often. And I want to talk about a people pleasing fear, because I think a lot of people pleasers have this fear of disappointing people. And I know that I myself have this thing. It's less and less the more I uncover and the more I recognize my patterns. But the fear of disappointing people, especially like for leaders with high empathy, it's because they genuinely care. Like, I obviously genuinely care about people, and I don't want people to feel overlooked, or I don't want someone to feel like I'm being unfair, and I could tell that I was protecting relationships that may not need protection, right? Or deserve protection if we're going to go that far, right? And I didn't want to damage relationships, but now I can tell that I refuse to abandon myself and allow the relationship to damage, because saying how you feel, professionally, courteous, with all the things, should not damage a strong enough relationship. And I'm talking about a professional relationship right now, guys. We're at work. So, and so if you being honest about the way you feel, or you being honest about, some criticism, some feedback, if that damages the relationship, then you know what? Like, to be honest, you're responsible for the way you deliver it, but you cannot be responsible for the way that person emotionally accepts it. They have to go through their process as well, right? And so when we say yes, when we really mean no, or we continue to over explain our decisions, or we delay accountability out of fear of damaging whatever relationship, or looking bad, or they're going to start talking, again, from the outside, it does look like compassion, but it's rarely compassion. It's wearing the clothes of compassion. But I had to start asking myself, am I actually helping this person, or am I protecting myself from the discomfort? And that's not the same thing. And most of the time when I am doing those things, I notice that it was me who's uncomfortable and trying to protect myself from the discomfort, instead of just honoring whatever I have to say, why I have to say it, and allowing this person to go through their process as well. Think about going to the gym. If I lifted the weight for every workout for someone else, then I'd probably feel very helpful. And you would thank me if it was for you, but you would not get stronger. And so growth requires resistance. And so I can't keep protecting everybody else because I'm the only one growing, and I'm only growing in one direction. I'm not allowing the discomfort to grow me as well. And so leadership works the same way. You can't take someone else's reps from them and expect them to grow. They're not going to grow. Every difficult conversation is a rep, and every boundary is also a rep. So every time you allow someone to wrestle with a challenge instead of rescuing them, it's another rep for them. And rescuing feels very loving in the moment, but I think long term, the most loving thing you could do for someone is let them struggle through it, is allow them to build the resilience that they're going to need in order for them to be successful in the future. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts that we can give people. Is it's not necessarily comfort, it is discomfort, so that they can grow from it. And people are extremely resilient. And I remember the first time somebody told me that people were resilient was during a layoff. And, I was going through it, and this person said, they're going to be fine. People are resilient. And I thought he was such an asshole for saying that at the moment, but he was right. Everybody landed on their feet. It was really early in my career as a leader, and I just didn't understand how companies were doing that. And since, obviously, it's been 15, maybe 20 years since then. And now I understand there are business decisions that are tough, and people are resilient. And it is a requirement of us as leaders to allow them to become resilient. It's there where they get confidence. It's earned through that responsibility, not otherwise. And so, jumping into the perfection side of things, we often call perfectionism excellence. And there is a fine, fine line between excellence and perfectionism. And what's fascinating is that we can jump really easily from people pleasing into perfectionism. And they usually go hand in hand. And most people think it's, again, because they have high standards. But I often think it's more so, at least what it was for me, was I didn't want to look foolish, or I didn't want to fail, or my work needs to look like Romie did it, right? And all of that is really nice and very egoic at the same time, because yes, it's true that your work should stand for itself and your work should be good. And again, there's a fine line between good enough and never quite good enough. And so we need to examine that and understand that good enough and getting the project in, even if it needs revision, very little revision afterwards, it's okay. I don't turn in something if I know that it needs revision. I'll revise it, but I won't hold it assuming that there are more revisions that need to be done that aren't quite obvious just yet. Like, just submit it. You're going to be fine. And the better question is, what if there is a mistake? What if you do look foolish? What if, right? What does that mean to you, and why does that matter? That's the question that I was asked by a coach that said, what if you do look foolish? What if you do look dumb? What does that mean? And I really had to sit with that, and it was an aha moment for me to understand that, like that too is neutral. It doesn't matter. It's like the media. It's a cycle. Somebody's going to forget as soon as somebody else does something silly or whatever it is. And I had to release myself from the burden of always trying to look good, always trying to be good, always trying to be quote unquote perfect. And, perfectionism often delays the impact that you're trying to have. And I know that we continue to tell ourselves it's because we're refining or improving. And those things are true. But again, there's a line. And, if you keep waiting, it'll be impossible to judge when it's actually finished. And so opportunities continue to move forward while you're still stuck trying to make the last one perfect. So who taught us that mistakes weren't allowed? You don't have to answer that today, but it's something that you could think about and just notice what comes up, because failure doesn't assign meaning. We do. A missed deadline doesn't automatically mean you're incompetent. A presentation that doesn't land well doesn't mean that that you don't belong in the room. Difficult conversation that doesn't go as well as planned doesn't mean you're a bad leader. Those are just the stories that we continue to attach to these neutral events. And so I encourage us, all of us, to not give neutral events meaning of like shame or guilt, because it's not asking for that power. You're literally the one assigning it. And what leadership looks like when we stop running from is we stop people pleasing and we stop trying to be perfect, and we actually get to be ourselves. And the same way our friends get to see us and love us for who we are, the people that work with us also get to see us in a professional way, the way we are, and our opportunities and our strengths. And we get to play on each other's strengths and help each other where there's opportunity. And it looks a lot less like performance and it looks more like presence. And that takes us right into what executive presence is, right? And it is not having all the answers. It's not the one that speaks the loudest or always is right. It's the one that's willing to say, I don't know, or I changed my mind, and tell me more, and I need a minute to think because I'm not really sure right now. And secure leaders, they don't need to prove that they're the smartest person in the room. They just need to be in the room, right? A lot of us leaders are always trying to work the room when in reality, we just have to be there and contribute where we can, add value where you can, and not have a need to be seen. That need comes from somewhere else very deep. And so you can go on that journey yourself to ask where that need comes from, where the need to always speak after the last person, where the need to always add to this point, where does that come from? If it's not necessarily really and truly adding value to the conversation, where does it come from? Do you even notice that you're doing it? I have a belief that most people don't even notice that they're doing it. They're just on autopilot, and you can from the outside see that their nervous system is running rampant and they're anxious or they're reactive. But it's the most grounded leaders that I've been around that transform rooms, that transform conversations and meetings, and those are the ones that have the most presence. Executive presence is really not just charisma and being able to be smooth and work the room. It's regulation and presence and quietness. I was just on a call with a few leaders, but there was one leader in particular that was a standout for me. And I 1,000% know he said the least amount of words in that entire meeting. And yet his focus and his ability to actually listen to what was being said and ask these thoughtful questions to me was a learning opportunity for me because it was the first time in a while that I've seen a leader hold the room and not say quite anything at all. And I admire that. And I'm learning from that myself. I've lived in all of these things, guys. It's just a normal human experience to be insecure about things, to want things to look good, to, not necessarily want to outdo other people, but want your work to speak for itself. I don't think that that's out of the ordinary. I think that's very ordinary. I think that that contributes to success, but I've over explained my decision because I didn't want someone to think I was unfair. I've polished my work longer than necessary because I wanted it to be perfect. And I felt the urge to need to prove myself in rooms where I was already in. And that's why I'm talking about this stuff. It's not because I'm preaching to the choir. It's because these are the things that I've done as well. And I'm not talking about it from a place of someone who's mastered it. I'm still learning, as I just explained. I'm just recognizing and talking about my patterns and inviting you to look at your patterns. And once you recognize those patterns, then you have choice. And I think we've all been taught that leadership is about becoming more. And lately, I've noticed that it's more so letting go. When I start to look at the successes that I've had and the success of other people, it's more so that they are, again, just grounded and present, and they're not avoiding, and they're not working the optics only. They're here to have a positive impact, and they don't necessarily need to be the one to have a positive impact, but they want to contribute to that positive impact. And they've let go of the need to prove. They've let go of the need to be the one who has all the answers. And you start to see something really nice happen. Something really beautiful is happening within leadership. And it's, I've said it before, it's because there's a shift happening, and generational shift, and a shift in the way we work with automation and AI. And, it's forcing us to be connected. It's forcing us to have more human interaction. And I think it's great because it's forcing us to also look at the parts of us that we're hurting, right? And that don't serve us anymore. And when you stop leading from a place of protection, you start leading from a place of purpose. And I think that that's why we all became leaders. And some of us became leaders for the money and to climb the ladder. I know that. But I think most people became leaders because they actually like people, and they want the company to be successful, and they want their teams to be successful. And just all of our shit, all of our baggage is the only thing that gets in the way of that. And so here we are talking more and more about healing in a way we've never talked about it before, and looking at our patterns and neuroscience and neural pathways. And it's because we actually want to get better. And transformational leadership doesn't begin when you start implementing a new framework, or, implementing a new skill that you've learned. It's more so when you start to get really curious about yourself as the leader. And if you're not quite a leader yet, then, the work is still there for you to do, so that when you step into leadership, you don't have to do it. Because what I found is that people will tell you what they think of you when you're a leader. It's just part of the gig. And if you're not secure enough to be able to understand, one, where they're coming from, and then two, be able to look at yourself and see just where that's coming from or what they may be talking about, you could, you know, project and be less than courteous and miss the entire point and waste so much time on how that person made you feel instead of moving the business forward. And that's the work right now. The work is asking, what am I protecting? And then having the courage to look at it and put it down. And I think that that'll expand from your work life into your home life, and all of your relationships will get better. Because when you stop finding the need to cover yourself, and you realize that the only one that actually matters is what you think of you, you'll see that life ends up opening up for you, and in really beautiful ways. And things get easier, not because life gets easier, but because you start to work the courage, the muscle of courage, to look and then to decide. And I hope that, and I wish that for all of us, that we continue to do this work. for ourselves first, for our families next, and then for the people that we lead, because everybody deserves the best version of us. And so with that, we end this week's episode of Leadership from the Heart. I hope this one hit home. Please don't forget to like, share with somebody else, and subscribe. Subscribe to the channel. We're going to keep talking about this. I think we've got like one more week of stuff. Next week, we'll get a little bit deeper, a little bit more woo-woo, and then we'll dive into some other stuff. And if you guys have anything you want to know more about, feel free to write a comment, send a DM, do whatever you need to do. We'll make sure that we respond, and perhaps it could be the next podcast episode. So thanks for engaging. See you next week. Bye. Wanna hear you go.